Determine the solutions of the equation x squared minus 4x equals -3. In this lesson, you will extend your thinking about solving equations by applying your factoring skills to a new type of equation called a quadratic equation. Let's start with some review. Being that you have to apply your factoring skills, let's talk about the factoring methods that we reviewed in the last unit. So whenever you're presented with a polynomial, the very first thing you always check for is the greatest common factor. Next, depending on whether it's a trinomial or a binomial, you have to either look for sum and product, if it's in the form x squared plus bx plus c, or you look for dots, if it's in the form a squared minus b squared. We are going to be still using these factoring methods all throughout this new unit. Let's also review something that we haven't looked at in a really long time, and that's the zero product property. So if I give you this equation, 4 times a equals 0, what can you tell me about a? Well, being that 4 times a number is giving us a product of 0, the only value a could be is 0. The zero product property says if the product of two factors is 0, then either the first factor is 0 or the second factor is 0. That's really crucial to solving quadratic equations. Let's go on to the core lesson now. So quadratic equation, I'm sure a lot of you are thinking, what is a quadratic equation? Well, a quadratic equation is an equation in the form ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. Now that should look familiar to you, that ax squared plus bx plus c is a trinomial in standard form, and so a quadratic equation takes that trinomial in standard form and it sets it equal to 0. The degree of a quadratic equation is always 2, which means there could potentially be 2 solutions. Sometimes there will be 1, and sometimes there will be 0, but most often there will be 2 solutions. Okay, so let's try a practice problem solving a quadratic equation together. What are the solutions of the equation x squared plus 2x minus 15 equals 0? So right away I see that this is a quadratic equation because I see an x squared. I see a degree of 2 in this trinomial. So we begin by factoring the polynomial. The polynomial is x squared plus 2x minus 15. It's a trinomial. It's in the form x squared plus bx plus c, which means I can factor it by sum and product. So my sum is 2 and my product is -15. So think about what 2 numbers could work here for this puzzle. It gives us a sum of 2 and a product of -15. The numbers are 5 and -3. So what we do with these numbers, just like we've done for the past month, is we set them up as 2 factors, 2 binomial factors, x plus 5 times x minus 3, and we set it equal to 0 because that's what it is in the equation. It's equal to 0. It's really important that it's equal to 0 because if it's not, then we can't use the zero product property. But at this point, we will use the zero product property. So just to review, the zero product property says that if the product of 2 factors is equal to 0, then either the first factor is 0 or the second factor is 0. So let's begin with the first factor, x plus 5. So it's either this factor is 0 or the second factor, x minus 3, is 0. And this makes it really easy for us because now we have 2 single-step equations to solve. Let's begin with the x plus 5 equals 0. Solve it by subtracting 5 on both sides. And we get x equals -5. Then we go on to the x minus 3 equals 0. And we solve that by adding 3 to both sides. So x equals 3. We now have 2 solutions of this quadratic equation, and the solutions are x equals -5 or x equals 3. Let's look at another one. Determine the solutions of the equation x squared minus 4x equals negative 3. This was the very first question I presented with you at this lesson. So right away, the first step here is different than the first step in the first guided practice. It says get the equation to equal 0. Well, in order to solve a quadratic equation, it needs to equal 0. Because remember, a quadratic equation is in the form ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. Right now, it says it's equal to negative 3. We can't have that. So bringing back this equation, first I need to get the negative 3 to disappear and become 0. So I need to add 3 to both sides. By adding 3 to both sides, my new equation is x squared minus 4x plus 3 equals 0. Well, now I have the polynomial that's equal to 0, so let's factor the polynomial. We have x squared minus 4x plus 3, and again we have to decide which factoring method to use. So I see a trinomial. It's in the form x squared plus bx plus c, so sum and product. My sum is negative 4, product is 3. What are the two numbers? Negative 3 and negative 1. So we'll use those in our factors, and we get x minus 3 times x minus 1 equals 0. Now it's time for the zero product property. So either the x minus 3 is equal to 0, or the x minus 1 is equal to 0. Solve them separately. Add 3 to both sides. We get x equals 3. Add 1 to both sides, and we get x equals 1. So the solutions of this equation are x equals 3 or x equals 1. We'll do one more guided practice and see how this one could be slightly different. Determine the solutions of the equation x squared minus 12 equals 24. So again, I notice that my equation is not equal to 0, so we begin by getting the equation to equal 0. Right now it's equal to 24. So how do we get that 24 out? We have to subtract it. So subtracting 24 from both sides results in x squared minus 36 equals 0. It's still a quadratic equation because I have that second degree polynomial, so we need to factor the polynomial. So right now the polynomial is x squared minus 36. What do you notice about this? This is a dots. So how do we factor dots? Well, we take the square root of the first term and the second term, and we set it up into two binomial factors. X plus 6 times x minus 6 equals 0. Again, zero product property. So either the x plus 6 is equal to 0, or the x minus 6 is equal to 0. Solve them separately. Subtract 6 from both sides, x equals negative 6. Or add 6 to both sides, and x equals positive 6. So our solutions are x equals negative 6 or x equals positive 6. Okay, so I have a quick assessment for you. I'd like you to turn your paper over to the back and answer the question on the top of the page. And the question is, what is the first step in solving a quadratic equation? Pause the video, answer the question, and come back. Okay, so let's try it. Keep in mind how you answered your question. What are the solutions of the equation x squared plus 11x plus 28 equals 0? I hope you answer the question by saying the first step is to get the equation to equal 0. Well, here it's already equal to 0, so that first step is done for you. But I'd like you to go back to the 3 guided practice problems that we did together, and I want you to try this one on your own. So pause the video, and when you're done, press play. Are you ready to check your answer? So the solutions of x squared plus 11x plus 28 equals 0 are x equals negative 7 or x equals negative 4. So if you follow my work from the top, the first thing I did was I factored the polynomial using sum and product, and it's x plus 7 times x plus 4, and then I used the zero product property, and I solved both single step equations separately. How did you do? All right, let's try one more on your own. Determine the solutions of the equation x squared minus 27 equals 6x. Keep in mind, what's the first step in solving a quadratic equation? And try this on your own, pause the video, and when you're done, press play. Are you ready to check your answer? Okay, so the solutions of the equation x squared minus 27 equals 6x are x equals 9 or x equals negative 3. So in this case, it was not equal to 0. We had to get it equal to 0 by subtracting 6x from both sides. And remember, it always needs to be written in standard form. So the polynomial is now x squared minus 6x minus 27 equals 0. Sum product, we get x minus 9 times x plus 3, and we solve and we get x equals 9 or x equals negative 3. I hope you guys did well, and you have a lot more practice problems to continue, but at this point I have to say, in this lesson, you have learned how to solve a quadratic equation by factoring and using the zero product property. So continue with the packet. You have a few more questions to work on, and I hope to see you all tomorrow. Enjoy the rest of your day.